Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Hi, everybody. Happy Father's Day to everyone out there who celebrates. I hope you all have a wonderful day. We do have a new show coming soon called Dads Don't Have Time To, but I'm not going to spoil any surprises about that now. I hope you all have a really great day. The episode for today is about Jeff Hoffmann's book called Other People's Children, a novel. Jeff quit a perfectly good job in IT consulting at the age of 47 to return to school to get his MFA in fiction. He enrolled at Columbia College, Chicago, with a cohort comprised of students closer to his children's age than his own. Jeff had started turning one of his short stories into a novel when it won the Madison Review's 2018 Chris O'Malley Prize in Fiction. A few weeks after he graduated, Simon & Schuster bought Other People's Children. Jeff lives in Elmhurst, Illinois, with his wife and 2 children, and I hope you enjoy our episode. Happy Father's Day. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Other People's Children.
Thank you, Zibby. It's very exciting to be here.
And I know I was just mentioning to you, I have your hardback, but I've seen your amazing paperback and the new design, and it's very cool. And I really want to talk to you about, I kind of love the idea that paperbacks let you rebrand a book altogether, right?
Right.
How involved were you in the 2 different covers? And then I want to talk about the book itself.
You know, I was involved in both. The paperback cover was actually one of the choices that was considered for the hardback. And was the one that I lobbied for. But, you know, the Simon & Schuster chose the cover that they chose. And I just love the paperback version of it because it really prepares the reader for what they're going to read as part of the story. So, you know, I feel that the hardback, you know, kind of presents it as a love story to a certain degree. And it really, for me, it's a story about, you know, busted expectations and a story of literary suspense or domestic suspense. And so I think the paperback just, you know, presents that more or better and allows the reader to expect things more accurately.
And could you tell listeners now what the book is about? And then I want to ask you some other stuff.
Sure. So Gail and John Durbin, they're 30-somethings living in downtown Chicago, and they moved to the suburbs when Gail first becomes pregnant, and she miscarries 3 times before they turn to adoption to build a family. Carly Brennan is a struggling teenager. She's pregnant, and she chooses to place her baby for adoption and chooses the Durbins. And she feels like she's made the right decision until her domineering mother, you know, embarks upon a campaign to change that decision. And the Durbins bring Maya home and fall in love with her and start to mend their fractured marriage. And they have her home for about 4 days when they learn that Carly has chosen to reclaim her baby, which she has every right to do. And the Durbins, rather than giving the baby back, decide to run, and they disappear.
I love how in fiction you can just live out, like, well, what if we just did this?
What if?
Right? What would happen?
Right.
Like, I'm not really going to do it, but if, what? Right. I mean, you know, how would I do it?
I was in a book club, and some of the people were saying, I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm buying that this family would run. And one of the women in the book club said, well, I was in this exact same situation. And in California, you have a year to reclaim your baby. And you're in California. And she said, we had talked, you know, there was, for a while it was on the edge, and we had talked about what are we going to do? Are we going to stay? Are we going to go? And so, you know, it's something that people really face.
Well, people will do all sorts of things for their children. And I think the line of when it becomes your child or not is very blurry, which you call attention to. It's like one of the main things. You know, so on the last thing about the covers, on the hardback, it says R.J. Hoffmann, and you made the decision on the paperback to say Jeff. And I know there was some, not controversy, but some people didn't appreciate the fact that you were a man writing from women's points of view, which is ridiculous. And especially because John has many chapters of his own in here. So he's just one of many. And then you wrote this amazing article at Fiction Be Fiction about sort of the right to decide what you can write about and who should write it and what stories you can tell, which I just thought was amazing. I mean, so true and so important. And yeah, so tell me about both you coming out as like the male author here on this book and that decision and all of that.
Yeah. So the decision to go with initials was Simon & Schuster's along with the cover. So my mother's still a little angry about that. I'm happy to see how things turned out with the paperback. And you know, they put my picture on the cover, right? So it wasn't, we didn't hide the fact that I was a man, or, you know, the correct pronouns were used in the bio and all that. But I think they chose not to lead with that because it's a story of families. It's a story of mothers. I certainly didn't set out to write a story about mothers. Actually, the short story this was based upon was from John's point of view entirely. And but then, you know, when I started telling Carly's side of the story, and she was a birth mother, right? You can't. The birth father was gone. It shifted from John and Gail's story to Gail and Carly's story in a lot of ways. And so there is more representation. And you know, when I wrote that PW piece, I should say that I was real careful to distinguish between cultural appropriation.
Yes, you were.
And writing from a different gender, right? And I value a ton of the books that have come from the Own Voices movement. And I certainly don't mean to say you can write whatever you want and say whatever you want about yourself. But I love one of my favorite books from the last few years was Fleischman is in Trouble.
So good.
And, you know, that's written from a man's point of view, kind of wrapped in a woman's point of view. But if it's a man's point of view that it's being told from and written by a woman, and she nailed it, right? She just killed it. And that made the book better for me. So I think that it's a conversation that our culture will continue to have, and happy to participate in it. And I'm just terribly excited that my book got published. So
there's another book, I don't know if you've read it, called What is Missing, about infertility and a father and son. And you should read that.
Okay.
It raises some of the same questions and is written by a man, mostly about from women's point of view. It's really beautiful. But anyway, same type of thing that also has like a little triangle situation. But anyway, but your article too, I mean, you shared a lot. And could I just like quote from your article if I can find it, if I can even read it? Let me get my glasses on, my middle-aged tokens here. Okay, so let me just jump to this. You said, was it my story to tell? Let me back up and make it a little bit better. I'm probably not the first new writer. Oh, that was funny that you're reading all your reviews. Some of the most impactful characters in the book are women. And the assumption that I was also a woman suggested that I had succeeded at some level in writing those characters well. My favorite reviews remained those that refer to me with female pronouns. I was troubled, though, by the reviewers who found it problematic that a man wrote the book. Other People's Children tells the story of a couple who, after struggling with infertility, adopt a baby girl. The birth mother decides to reclaim her child after 4 days, and the adoptive parents choose to run rather than return the baby. Was it my story to tell? I could tell you about the moment I first laid eyes on my own adopted children. I could tell you about the fierce love that hit me like waking from a deep sleep into a bright light. I could tell you that the book for me is about shattered expectations and the pain of separation from a child. I could tell you that my daughter was living in a residential treatment center while I wrote it, struggling with mood disorders layered atop autism. And I could tell you about all the expectations that experience shattered for me. I could tell you that although Other People's Children is not my family story, our story litters the margins of the book. Oh, that's really beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Talk to me about sharing your own feelings, but channeling it through other people, and how fiction serves as such a great receptacle of that. And maybe touch on your own experience, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. You know, my daughter will talk about it as much as I will. I'm careful when I talk about that experience to try to, talk about what I went through, because that's a part of it that I own, right? That there's part of it that my daughter owns that is her story to tell when she chooses to tell it. When she was 13 or 12 or 13, when kind of puberty hit, she has always had autism, and bipolar disorder got layered upon that, which can be a tough combination. And it was a violent year for our family, where a lot of bad things happened before, with multiple hospitalizations and self-harm and violence. And before we made the heart-wrenching choice, and she was part of that choice, enrolling her in the residential treatment center. So and it was the toughest decision, the toughest time I've ever been through, right? And as I was going through, I quit my job at 47 to go get an MFA, and that was during the time that my daughter was gone. And so my first semester, I wrote a bunch of short stories, and I went there knowing I wanted to write a novel, right? That was the thing. And I wrote a bunch of short stories, and gosh, I looked at them at the end of the semester to choose a novel from one of them, and lo and behold, every single one of them had this distance between a parent and a child, right? And I said, well, I guess that's the theme that we're going to attack here. And I chose the one that drew me the most. Again, my children are adopted, but we didn't go through this adoption story. And for me, this is about, you go into life, you go into adulthood, I should say, thinking with all kinds of expectations. Everybody does, about what's going to be available to you, what's going to be available to your children, with happiness and opportunities and being free from struggle. And then, it happens to all of us at some point and at some level that those expectations are not met. And this is, for me, the book was about how do people react, and how do people react when they're met with the shattered expectations, and what do they do about it, and how do they treat others when that happens?
Have you found that a lot of people are reaching out to you as a result of your story to share their own experience?
I have. And, I hope that's what comes out of it, right? That, people are able to, see that what they see on Facebook every day isn't what everybody experiences. And last summer, my daughter had a rough year last year, and she's doing much. She's been home since the beginning of COVID. So there's, if you end it right now, there's a happy ending. It's all how you frame the ending, right? But she had a rough year last year, and we were going through a bunch of med changes, and we were out at our lake house, and I took a picture of a beautiful sunset, and I posted it to Facebook. And I said, "It's really idyllic, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, my daughter and I are at the lake, trying to survive some medication changes after a hospitalization for mental illness." And I hope that helps somebody else out there that is scrolling through everybody's graduation pictures and prom pictures and understanding that, it's not like that for everybody. And a lot of people responded to that. And because everybody goes through stuff, right? And it's so easy to present that beautiful side of things rather than the true side of things.
But then you miss out on all human connection.
Right.
Then you're like completely on the surface of the water, as if, there was nothing down below. So you could do it, but what a loss that would be. I mean, there's also, when you have a child with a future that's not as you predicted, you also have that sense of loss. Like, you are grieving something that you thought was happening, something that you had assumed would be the case. And then you have to not only confront the challenge of the everyday, but let go of what you thought.
Yeah.
And that's a loss. I mean, that's also, like, I feel like people go through a lot of the grief response in addition, but they don't know that. And they beat themselves up, or they're like, why am I angry? Or why am I denying it? Or blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so I think there is some application of that.
And everybody deals with it in different ways. I know when my daughter was younger, and it was just autism we were dealing with. Those were the days, right? Oh. But my wife would, she would align all the therapies and buy all the toys and get all the books, and she dealt with it differently. I said, just stop and enjoy the moment, right? And live in the moment. She said, I hate your optimism. And I said, it's not optimism, it's pessimism. It's going to get a lot worse, right? So we got to enjoy right now. But I say that to speak to, different ways of dealing, but it's also, I have great empathy for the struggles that my daughter goes through, but she brings something to our family that no one else brings. And she brings a very, very different way of looking at the world that makes me laugh twice a day and 3 times a day. And so that diversity in a very specific and metaphorical ways is definitely made our family richer.
Can you go back for a second to the decision to quit your job at 47 and get an MFA? You just kind of glided right past that. Okay. So what were you doing before? How long did you want to be a writer and didn't do it professionally? Were you doing it on the side? Give me that whole story.
So I was born, my father was a high school teacher, and my mom was a dental hygienist. So, when I was growing up, and the funny thing is our TV broke when I was second grade, and they didn't replace it until we all hit the honor roll in the same quarter. And that took 2 years. And so back then there was nothing to do but read, right? So I read, and that's kind of when I fell in love with it. And but when I went to college, I got a finance degree, and because I went to a mediocre college, I went into IT because you couldn't get a finance job. And so I started a company borrowed $2,000 from my parents, and started a company with a friend from college, and we worked hard enough and were lucky enough to be successful with it. We sold it, and we, 4 years later, we bought another one, grew that, sold it. And so I would say I kind of earned, I was lucky to have the opportunity to do that, but, at the same time earned it. And I had written between those 2 companies for about 1.5 years. I wrote, 2 books that'll never see the light of day for very good reason. And then decided, hey, if I'm going to do this, I'm almost 50, always doesn't last forever. I've always wanted to do this. So I'm going to go back to school. And it was funny. I told everybody at work, of course, because I stopped showing up. But I didn't tell any of my friends back in Elmhurst. The novel's set in Elmhurst. That's where I live. And my rule was that I wouldn't lie. When somebody asked me, how's work? I would say, well, actually, I'm going back to school. And they'd say, oh, MBA? And I'm like, well, kind of, not really, though. And then after I told them what I was doing, they'd just kind of stare at me for a long moment and then walk away, or else tell me about the novel that they were planning to write someday. So then I went back to school with a bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds. There was actually a retired woman who helped me, feel part of the senior cohort. But it was great. When I went through undergrad, I did the bare minimum to get A's and B's, and didn't learn much other than how to deal with people, and which was a really important thing in the end. But when I went back for my MFA, I knew how valuable this time was, and I knew, after working so hard over the last 3 decades, I knew that this was my shot to do this thing that was really important to me. So I spent 60 hours a week either writing a novel or working on schoolwork, and So I really treated it as a job and got way more out of it than I would have if I did it when I was 24 and was just trying to get my MFA. I didn't really care if I got an MFA. I wanted a novel out of the deal.
Wow. So how soon after you graduated did you write the novel and sell it?
So the novel I started writing the end of my first semester. So I finished it. It took 5 semesters to finish, and I finished it at the beginning of my last semester and started submitting it. And Harvey Klinger, my agent, I got about 7 folks to read it. And I did the cool thing for me, the thing that's maybe exciting for other writers, is I kind of went through the front door. I just sent things to people in New York. I knew 0 people in New York, and sent it out to 45 agents. And Harvey was one that replied, and he said, hey, I really like it, but you need to change all these things. And so I spent 2 months rewriting it, as I was, hoping another agent would make me not rewrite it. And, they all rejected it, and I resubmitted to Harvey, and he signed me up the first week of January. And by the second week of January, it sold at the Simon & Schuster.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like, what? what? That was like, my daughter she was still in the RTC at the time. I was driving her home for a weekend visit. And when Harvey called, and I reacted in a way that you can only imagine. And she said, this is the happiest I've ever seen you. Is this the happiest day of your life? And I said, yes. And then I had the common sense, Dad, except for the day I married your mother and the day that I adopted you and your brother.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is great. I love that story. That's such a wonderful success story. I love it. Actually, when I graduated from business school, I tried to write a novel. I mean, I wrote a memoir that made it a novel that I made. And I worked on it for like whatever. Anyway, that was my agent. My agent was Sarah Crow, but she worked with Harvey Klinger.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they didn't sell my book, which I understand now in retrospect.
I understand on my first two as well.
Yeah, I never should have. If there's one piece of advice I feel like everybody needs to hear, it's like you must have 2 finished novels tucked away somewhere in your house. When you were saying that, I was like, I should design like a 3-novel like storage file cabinet so that people know they need to fill up the first and second one before they have the third one they can submit. Yeah. Like it's okay. It's not, you're not supposed to sell the first one.
It takes more than 85,000 words. It takes about 750,000 words to get the
word. No, don't say that. That's literally like so overwhelming. It makes me want to like never type again. Oh my goodness. 750,000 words. Oh my gosh. Well, it shows that it can happen when you're ready.
That's the fun thing. And I was old enough. I was 50, I think, when I sold it. And I was just giddy. I couldn't sleep for it. Like I slept for like 3 hours that week just because I would wake up and I'd say, I have a novel. I'm going to have a novel.
Oh, exciting.
I told my wife at the time, I'm like, I'm old enough to realize that now is the best part, right? It's unsullied by whatever everybody else thinks and, sales numbers and reviews and all that stuff. It's like I've done that thing and the rest will be fun in its own way. But
I've had goosebumps like 4 times as you've been telling me this story. They just keep like going up and down. It's so exciting. And yeah. What do you think it is? I mean, I feel the same way as you. I know so many authors do. Like, I feel like there is no greater thing than like selling something you've been working on, right? Like getting that, is it the validate? Like, I mean, I literally can't explain as you felt like there's nothing better, but why? Like, I don't know. Why is it such a big deal for writers? Like, why do we get so excited? Is it that we need the validation so badly, or is it that, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I hear you. Cause I spent the rest of my career selling stuff, right?
Right. Like there are other accomplishments.
IT services, right?
Yeah,
and those weren't nearly as fun. Selling companies was kind of fun, but for me, it was the lottery ticket idea, right? I was old enough to know that I was probably going to come out of my MFA with a book that would get rejected, and then I'd go back to do the next thing, right? And I knew going in I was not going to be successful, but I was going to take this shot, and so that's part of it. And part of it is that things move so slowly in publishing, from short stories all the way through to agents to novels, that this was one of those times where lightning struck. And I think the other part of it is that you put so much of yourself into that novel that, I mean, I stared at that. I moved those words around for 2,000 hours, right? And on top of the 4,000 or 5,000 that I had already invested in trying to write, and with 4 people reading it, 5 people reading it, and nobody else caring, and so there's a lot at risk, at kind of emotional risk when you set aside time in the middle of your life to tell people that you're going to go write a novel, and tell yourself that you're going to go write a novel.
I love reducing it to I moved words around. Words around. When you said I moved words around for 2,000 hours, like that's it. Just writing is just moving the words around.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's just words. It's just words like in a Word doc.
Little forklift, just like picking them up and putting them somewhere else or something, like in the sand. And so I heard you have a second novel coming out. What is that?
Actually, it's with my agent right now. So
it's with your agent. Okay, second novel written. Okay.
Yeah, so and I've started on my third. It's about 4 boys 18-year-olds who get in a fight in a Burger King parking lot, as 18-year-old boys do, and they kill one of the other boys and maim the second. And
that is not what 18-year-old boys usually do.
But it's, I would say that in my experience where I grew up, I felt like every other weekend it was kind of on the edge of that, right?
All right. Okay.
And everybody's seen that almost happen. I think most 18-year-old boys have seen that almost happen, and so their friendship fell apart. They don't see each other until they're 50, and one of them dies, and they see each other at the funeral. And the dead man's wife happens to be a journalist and seems to know a few things, and all of them have kind of wrapped around that center are stories in each of their lives about the kind of the rots that happen is with the lies that they told and the withholding that they've done. And one of them has buried himself in corporate law, and another ignored his family. Another is he'd become a broker of torsos for medical device companies, and has a flawed relationship with his wife. And the third has a wonderful relationship with his wife and has gone into the trades, but his wife happens to be the prosecutor in the county that they killed that boy. So things are complicated.
Wow, interesting.
So
I like it. And you're working on a third. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's what I'm doing right now. So I better get up at 7 a.m. and start writing.
So that's why you were up early for this interview.
That's right.
I understand now.
I have to get my 1,000 words in. I have to get my 1,000 words in.
I get it. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for chatting today. This was so fun. And
thank you, Zibby.
I feel like this sense of pride in your work now, not proud, but I'm invested in it. I want to hear about the success, and it's very exciting when you know more of the backstory to
thank you.
Enjoy them. Anyway, you know what I mean.
Thank you for being excited about it. I still get goosebumps when I tell that story, and that's what keeps me coming back to the desk every morning. And thank you so much for spending the time this morning.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Have a great day. Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.